Hi, and welcome to another episode of Leadership Lenses, the podcast for principals, heads of school, and anyone else looking to enhance and improve Jewish education. I am thrilled to have with us today someone who was my mentor for many years through today, and actually the person who hired me for my first job in formal education. So if you've been looking for who to blame, we're going to introduce you right now. Welcome and thank you for being with us today, Rabbi Eli Rubin. Rabbi Rubin is currently the Rosh Yeshiva and head of school at Kushner in New Jersey. Um, he has been there for 18 years, which is a tremendous portion of the career and stint in one place. And before that, he was a Dean and Headmaster at Ramaz for 18 years as well. So it seems 18 years is a good number. But really, Rabbi Rubin, for those who don't know him, there's probably very few of you who don't, because his name really precedes him across Jewish education circles as a leader and someone who has built and developed schools through extensive and successful tenure. So, Rabbi Rubin, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much. Quite overstated. And Barry, I have to say that when I met you and had the privilege of hiring you, I was humbled to be your colleague. It was quite reverse. And I remember many of the exchanges we had based on your academic research on how we can enhance Jewish education, even in your early years as a young educator. So thank you for inviting me to your podcast.
My pleasure. I'll say that's overstated as well, but we'll agree to disagree on both the introductions and jump right in. So, look, it's rare that we get to speak to people who have successfully built schools for extended periods of time, and I want to touch today on just a few of those aspects and hear what your thinking is. I want to start with something that I know many heads are worried about. It's not the most enticing thing to always talk about, but if we can, I'd love to start on the financial side. You've been at Kushner 18 years. There have been ups and downs in world finances and community finances over time. Can you tell us a little bit about your perspective, what you've tried to do over this time, and maybe what you've accomplished and where some of the struggles have been?
Okay, and I'm sorry for being pedantic, but I just not comfortable with the word using build schools. I
Okay.
like to think that together we are enhancing and fortifying the institutions that exist and taking it to the next level. And building has a whole different connotation to it. So I know that you didn't mean anything differently, but I want to make sure that I don't engage in self-aggrandizement. So it's an interesting conversation because in order for schools to be successful, it has to be a place that creates a sense of community and caring, and it has to cohere people around a shared vision. And it's a relationship concept that exists between teachers, administrative and teachers and students. And relationally is what builds the school program, whatever that mission may be. Once you go into a relationship framework with those that you're working with, then it also becomes difficult to manage and maintain a hierarchical relationship at the same time. So there's a balance. And when people say school is like a family, I really try not to use that term for school because I don't think it's true. I think schools are community, and it's a community based on a shared mission and a value. But because it's a community and it's also hierarchical at the same time, schools have to be willing to make very difficult decisions around fiscal responsibility. So that includes hiring and firing teachers. And it also sets tuition prices and collecting tuition, and also gifts and pledges. So the balance is to try to manage and maintain the sense of community and caring, which has an absolute direct impact on the student experience, but at the same time also recognize that this is a relationship that does have to follow to some degree a business model of efficiency.
Wow. So I love the value underlying that, and you're bringing it back to a conversation of, okay, we are a community, but we also have to be a business. And so can you give us some examples of where that comes up and how you've tried to navigate that tension and balance?
So I'll start with the community because if teachers are treated respectfully and administration has a collaborative relationship and a cooperative relationship and a caring relationship with faculty that's authentic, that's not utilitarian, it absolutely has a direct impact on the way that teachers will relate to students. Because the community is a vertical one, even though we'd like to think that we're horizontal, but there really is a vertical relationship within the school, especially with the adults and the children. And if there is a sense of underlying respect that is informing all relationships, that also has an impact on students. So this is both on a meaningful way, because that's our mission, but also on a utilitarian level, that there needs to have that assumption that people are treated with respect. But when there is someone who is not performing to the standards of the school, or there is no longer a need for a certain particular service within the school, we have to also be willing to say that we're a community that cares, but we're also a community that has to run efficiently. So there needs to be the willingness to set standards, professional standards, on every level of school management, and if necessary, either give people a PIP, a professional improvement plan, and then discontinue the relationship. If it could be an entire program that says this is no longer necessary for the school and we have to move on, even though it creates collateral damage. So therein lies the tension, because once people around the periphery see that there are people who are not going to be maintained, then it does create a certain degree of tension, which then trickles into the motif of the school. I want to add one more point to that. I find that the people who are high performers, and they are encouraged and they are also supported when they see that those who are not performing at the same standard are having the administrative oversight and intervention, because they feel as if that they're being recognized for their high performance. So if a school doesn't intervene and doesn't support the high performing teachers or programs by somehow sending the message that low performance won't be tolerated, it actually hurts those who are really investing so much into the school.
Yeah, and that's a tricky area, definitely. Recently, Gali Cooks from Leading Edge, together with Ron Ashkenaz, put an article out in the Harvard Business Review that said leaders should not try to be nice. We need to try to be fair. We need to try to be kind in how we do things. But it's not just about, yeah, we're all going to treat everybody nicely and let things slide, because that's ultimately not kind to anyone.
Correct.
Ultimately, we need to be clear in order to be kind. So
But if I could just
that's
interrupt,
very much, yeah.
from an operational level, I would just take issue with the nice part. It depends how nice is defined. That word has to be nuanced and
Okay.
segmented. Every single person in the school, a leader should really has to put the other people he or she is leading first. So if anyone has a story in the school that they're carrying, a leader should be able to notice, and recognize it, and even address it if it's on a personal or if it's on a professional level. There is a certain degree of niceness that goes along in this job, and I really want to
Mhm.
say it from an authentic place, that everyone has to feel that, that person really does understand my particular station in life and my space. And therefore, when it times to give back to the school, it becomes it's more freely done. So people have their needs in life and their demands, that, okay, you could say that's kind to say, well, we're going to make exceptions for people to manage their own personal lives. But there's a certain degree of niceness that goes along in managing a community of faculty and students that's willing to make exceptions because you care about the person.
Right.
There really isn't a science here. I'd really be careful about segmenting it into columns, because nice and kind have to go together, but they also have to go together recognizing that the school has to act to really manage itself proficiently.
Right. And I know many heads and principals are particularly worried about that moment when you do have to let someone go after all of the attempts, after all of the professional improvement plans. You've done everything, but now you have to let them go. And people tend to be very worried about, what is this going to do to my faculty morale? And I understand the worry. It sounded like you were suggesting that it may not be that harmful, assuming that you're doing it correctly. And can you expand on that? Should we really be so worried?
You really summed it up nicely, yeah, because you have an excellent facility with language, and you have a very sharp cognitive sense. So the answer is correct. I am not that worried about it. I think, to the contrary, it demonstrates that there are standards and that people's contributions are appreciated, and they don't feel like they're being exploited by those who are not contributing on the same level. Now, of course, there is always going to be a core group of people that are close to the person who is no longer going to be employed, and that group is going to suffer and struggle, and they're going to feel a little bit estranged and some degree disenfranchised. That's just going to happen. But if that does happen, you know what? That's a meaningful change also in and of itself. I'm okay with that.
Mhm.
I don't want to linger too much on the hiring and firing because I do work in a school with 140 members of the faculty that we lovingly employ here. And if any of our people are going to hear this, it may sound as if that we're going on a purge of the most loyal people that we have. That is not the case, but because there are times when schools do go through transitions, and we did many, many years ago, and that there needed to be a course correction and that needed to change a significant portion of the faculty. It really does build a new culture from the bottom up. And I have found it to be extremely helpful to be transparent and to be honest with people and to recognize this is where we want to go and this is how we're going to get there.
I definitely hear that. I definitely hear that. So let's jump to the other side of the ledger where you were talking about tuition and you were talking about fundraising, raising, obviously, and then collecting. Start anywhere in there that works for you. How did you work on the revenue side of the ledger?
Uh, a lot of it is we had really good governance. And I would be remiss if I would leave out that conversation that when it comes to financial stability, we have to be working in partnership with a strong team of board members who understand and appreciate that the future of the school depends on building a financial base that will be able to support in the present and into the future. Now, some of it is unique to us. We were fortunate to have made the board made some really great decisions as far as and we had the school had land and it sold the land and then we had an endowment. We had great donors from the commuting area. We had two 5-year campaigns of several $1 million each. I think it was 10 million altogether that can't be sustained in the long run. So I think some of it, the financial strength of the school has a lot to do with this particular community and the space that the school occupies, but it also has to, which is, I think, very particular and very specific. But what I think is more universal, and this is really risking self aggrandizement again. I'm just going to say what I see works, and I'm not talking about myself. Donors and the philanthropic community have to believe in the product to say something that's very kind of like compelling based on non-specifics of the institution won't resonate. So for instance, say, well, the community needs a strong school and you really need to support us, I think is not making a very clear case for for a value proposition. And it's
Mhm.
a little bit of the cart and the horse because in order to have a strong school, you have to have the resources. And once the resources begin to settle in and the school can demonstrate that is successful and that it is able to
Mhm.
move forward, have a strategic thinking and also an application of tactics, then donors are more willing to say, I'm willing to bet on this horse because I believe that you're going in the right direction. Now, if you don't demonstrate that you're moving in the right direction, I don't think that location or geography or even the bigger pictures of the Jewish world will be the answer for sustainability. So sustainability has to start with a commitment to what your community believe is excellent. Now that becomes complicated because in our schools, Barry, if you put together 100 people, you're going to have many different degrees of what you believe the school should move towards in that scale. And here's where I think it's very helpful to get surveys and to work with people, let's like Dr. Harry Bloom, and to better understand what is the nature of this community, what works in all communities, what makes
Mhm.
retention and enrollment such a powerful and compelling message. And then match that and marry it with what you think the mission is. We can't make the mission align with what we believe the latest fad is of what people are looking for. But a mission has to have a very noble identity, but it also has to be very practical and has to align with the community. So if you can somehow get all of these variables aligned and together and moving in the same direction, I think it's much easier to raise money from a community.
I definitely hear that. So I want to call out two pieces to what you said. One was the idea that, first of all, none of this is possible without a strong partnership between the head and the board. obviously the board chair in particular, your board executive leadership, but really governance broadly. And I think we've said that a lot on this particular podcast in various episodes, and we can never say it enough because the head chair relationship is the most important partnership in terms of the school and the head's success long term. Part two of what you were saying is essentially, if I put it succinctly, fundraising is about alignment. It's about finding that sweet spot between the school's inherent mission, what your community needs, wants, is looking for, and the way you can bring your own leadership as a head of school to that. So there's a lot of learning that's involved. And I appreciate you noting surveys or however else you do it. A lot of heads go on a listening tour. One head recently said, the best advice I ever got when I came in was drink a lot of coffee this year. Not because you're exhausted because you're working late. That might be a side note, but because you should be having coffee with everyone. You need to listen, you need to learn, and however you need to do that. And then you as a head bring that together to find the sweet spot of where all of that connects. And I want to use that to jump off into a slightly different direction, which is, mission of the school, what the community needs. You've seen the trajectory of the school over many years. The last couple of years have been unlike what we've seen in decades, generations in North American Jewish life. And I'm wondering what you see now as the most important thing we need to be thinking of as Jewish day school leaders.
I'm so glad you asked that question because I think that's the question that occupies my non-operational time maybe more than any other. Now, I have to add that I don't have that many non-operational hours, so it shouldn't think that I'm giving this a lot of thought. But I think that I've had this. I wish I've had this conversation more with colleagues, and frankly, I don't. And that's a little bit on me that I'm a little bit sequestered and isolated by choice, and a little
Okay,
bit
but
because.
you get to hit hundreds of colleagues right now, so we can make up a lot of ground.
Okay, so but this is not a dialogue. This is a monologue. Unless you're gonna stand in for the hundreds of colleagues and speak on their behalf. I'll tell you
I'll
how
do
most
my
people.
best.
There are a couple of things that are really concerning me. The first is that this is not a critique on American Jewry. We were living through such a golden period of time. No one ever thought that we would have to do a pivot to see ourselves as Jews and integrated Jews, Orthodox Jews, or conservative reform, or whatever Jews we are, whatever denomination within the greater world around us. We at first have to recognize that this has shifted dramatically. And it's just like the Rambam writes in Hilchos Tshuva that if you don't recognize the first part of where you're standing, you can't get to point B. I want to get, that's bucket number one. I'm going to get back to that. Bucket number two is where is America going? Putting the Jews
Mhm.
aside, where does the American politics, the American culture seem to be going in the next 3 years? Now, getting back to bucket number one, how does that impact the Jewish community? And then bucket number three is how are our students perceiving a reality that for everybody is new at the same time? It's not as if that parents are able to say, yes, when I
Mhm.
was 16, I had the same experience at 24. And as a parent, as an adult, I can share with you the way that I managed my journey. We're all now fixing the plane as we're flying it. So how do we possibly give the type of broader wisdom to students that we ourselves are trying to sift through at the same time? So those are my three buckets. Now I want to get back to each one of those buckets. Then the first one and two connect very carefully. Anti-Semitism in colleges may go under the surface again. Because I do believe that the kind of like this viral vitriol of venom has definitely shifted to other spaces, other arenas. And also for as long as not I'm not going into politics, but calling it the Trump effect, good or bad, where you like the man or don't like the man, it definitely had an impact in the way that colleges are managing protecting the Jewish community, and it may be very short-lived. But let's assume this does go under the surface in the college community. The right and the left are both moving towards the center of blaming and vilifying Jews. Now, we have a Jewish community. Of course, adults have to figure out how they want to manage it. How do we manage this with our students? On one hand, giving them the tools to understand the history and the nature of anti-Semitism, but on the other hand, making sure that they are proud, strong, resolute Jews who will not cower and will not retreat and will feel proud in any space they're going to be in, which is a very difficult and I think, a very complicated conversation.
Hmm.
On a side, anecdotally, I'm seeing, and I'm sure this is across the board in all of my colleagues' schools, our kids are actually responding with a lot of Jewish pride. It's really quite extraordinary, remarkable to me. So that fear of mine, at least currently, has been definitely mitigated by the fact that, or mollified by the fact that these kids are seeing themselves as stronger Jews. In fact, an interesting anecdote, a fourth grader asked me who I was going to go for in the Super Bowl. I said, well, I can't go for New England because they're from Boston. Sorry if you're from Boston, you're listening to this. And Boston's like the Red Sox. So as far as I'm concerned, the Patriots are like the Red Sox, and that's out of the question for me. So he said to me, but it's owned by Kraft. It's owned by a Jewish person. How do you not root for them? I said, that's a fabulous answer. That's exactly what you want to hear, that we are a Jewish team, that it's the network that transcends all different communities. But we still have to, in putting my excitement aside about the New England Patriots and this fourth grade boy, have to pivot our focus in schools to get to bucket two. I want to introduce a love of America as part of our curriculum. Now, that may sound really off the grid. I don't believe it is. I think what we are witnessing, that if we don't take responsibility for American culture based on Judeo-Christian morals, based on the biblical ethics, based on all of the founding fathers' vision with all of their terrible faults and all of the heinous crimes against humanity in some ways, but if we don't understand that America, as it was framed and it was formed, is the greatest republic that will ultimately protect the Jews around the world and protect Americans, our kids are going to sit it out. And we've never educated our kids, I haven't, to say that the American civic responsibility is theirs. And by the way, I think I have never really educated children to think that the Jewish community responsibility is theirs. Now, all of a sudden, they're growing up in a world where they have to somehow own both. They have to own Jewish responsibility because they're the tip of the spear. And they have to appreciate that we have a treasure in the United States that if we don't preserve, it's not going to be self-preserved as it once was. Those are the two very, very important buckets that I
Wow.
wanted to start with.
I love the complexity of what you're saying, and I'll be honest, I didn't think you were going there. When you started Jewish Pride, I thought you were going to talk about Jews within our community supporting one another, and you said that, right? And you said our kids have to be proud Jews and build our community, but adding that second bucket of Jewish communities having responsibility and our kids having responsibility for the future of America, I think is crucial. And that it makes it much more complex, much more powerful. And to note, founding fathers. So Thomas Jefferson famously talked about the need for educated citizens in order for any democracy to survive. And part of why we have such a strong public education system in the United States in particular is because of Jefferson and others who realized that if you don't educate everyone, you can never have a viable democracy. And so you're saying, well, as Jewish educators, that's part of what we're doing. We need to educate our kids not only about who they are individually, which we've spent a lot of time on, their knowledge, their skills, their development, all that's crucial, but add to that their responsibility for the Jewish community and their responsibility for American society broadly.
That's exactly right.
We have
I
to
think
make
it
the
was,
school day a lot longer, I think.
I know, but so here's a challenge that I have. How do you do this? How do we pivot? And I've been
Mm-hmm.
talking to the board about this, and I've been talking to faculty about it. And for me, my own personal journeys. I spent 10 years living in Israel. I've always felt that the um, expression of Jewish life would be in Israel for Jewish people, and that would be the way to strengthen worldwide Jewry is by strengthening Israel. And at the risk of sounding a little betraying my Zionist heritage and my commitment and devotion to Medina Israel, I think as we educate kids to strengthen Israel, as we did and we demonstrated and they showed us during the terrible, miserable wars with Gaza, we have to do the same for America. And if that means that we also bifurcate our message, that your goal by staying here in this country is by strengthening the American Republic, that has to also get fellowship. And I don't know if there's any real fellowship around this message in a broad sense
Mm-hmm.
in in the Jewish world, especially as politics in this country has become so vitriolic and so partisan. It's harder to even create a shared value among students to embrace the political direction of the United States. Take what's going on college campuses. How is it that so many college campuses have been able to vote in the early years a BDS on Yom Kippur, or come up with these, kind of these student council anti-Israel proclamations? Our kids are just not there. They weren't running for office. They weren't involved in student government because it was never our job. Our job is to go to college, get a degree, have a great experience, hopefully find a spouse, move, let's say, to the West Side, start a career, and build a family, move back into the modern Orthodox community or any community. Now we have to tell them, no, when you get to college, you better run for office because the narrative is being taken over, and we're losing that. So this is a really big ask, and we have no runway on it. I may add that I've been trying to push out David Brooks. David Brooks, if I haven't seen it, wrote a really fascinating goodbye article in the New York Times about departing the times and
Yes.
what he sees the significance of humanities. It is way too long for me to sum it up. In fact, I'd have to read it 3 more times in order to sum it up for anyone. I'm planning on using the next 1 or 2 faculty meetings in the high school to analyze David Brooks's article. And I strongly suggest everybody take a look at it.
Absolutely. And I would say what you're posing is a huge challenge, but education at its best is always countercultural. We don't set up day schools, Jewish day schools, to replicate what we had 20 years ago. If you're chasing the past, you're never going to get anywhere. And you're saying, okay, well, maybe our day schools need to not only be concerned about batten the hatches, and look outside, engage, and figure out how you can, and how we as educators can train kids for the future. Now, like you, I don't have a programmatic solution for how we do this, but I do believe that the messaging we give, kids pick up on so clearly. They know what we believe in. I remember the first year I was a principal, and my entire class of 8th grade boys dressed up like me for Purim, right? And I was shocked at how they got every detail of my, fashion sense or lack of fashion sense right at the moment. I was like, oh, they're paying attention. They're listening. If we are aiming in a direction and we're doing that authentically, they are likely to pick it up. And that may be where we need to start.
And I think the next podcast you should discuss fashion for principals, because clearly you made an impact and an impression on your students.
We will try. I won't go into what my fashion sense was in the early 2000s, but we will try. And look, we're just about out of time, but I think we're leaving people with something fascinating. So before we wrap up, I really want to thank you, Rabbi Rubin. I know
Thank you.
what your days look like, operational hours, thinking hours, etc. And thank you so much for being with us today and taking the time to share from your experience and your wisdom.
Thank you for the privilege and pulling me out of my silo, even for a half hour. I'm very grateful to you. And to spend time with you, Barry, is always a privilege. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And for everybody listening, we've said a couple things here. We've said some things on the very operational finance. How do you balance community with efficiency and understand that you're running an organization as well as a community? And we've said things on that really big picture of, for what are we educating? To what ends? What is the responsibility that we are bequeathing and teaching our children? And as we do every time, I want to encourage you to take one or both of these areas and think about how it might apply to your leadership, to your school. Try it out, and please let me know how it goes. As always, you can reach me, Barry Kislowitz, on LinkedIn, Leadership Lenses on Substack, or at our website, kislowitzconsulting.com.